I'm taller than everybody. So. First of all, good evening. It's always great to be back on Sanibel. Sometimes when I come, I sneak on the island. I'm kind of bumming it, like a lot of people do. But honestly, it's one of the great jewels of Southwest Florida and one of the great jewels of the United States. What I tell so many of my colleagues is that I have the honor and the distinction of representing the very best congressional district in all of America. And so the other members are like, no. The other members are like, no, you don't. My district's great. And we start comparing, start swapping cities. And I'm like, well, name a couple of yours. They tell me, I'm like, well, that place is pretty cool. They're like, well, what's in your district? I say, Sanibel, Captiva, Naples, Marco Island, Fort Myers, Bonita Springs, Estero, and they're like, oh. So it is a tremendous honor to be here with all of you. Second thing I want to do, I do want to thank your Mayor, Holly Smith. Mayor Smith, thank you so much for being a constant voice for Sanibel. And you and your council have all been a constant voice for Sanibel to my office, making sure I'm well aware of all the issues concerning the island and the things that the island is looking for. So I seriously want to thank you so much for that. John, I see you over here. John Lave from the Sanibel Captiva Chamber, thank you so much for all of your prodding. Is a good way to say it. No, John's been great. But constantly giving us all the information from the business community for Sanibel and Captiva and letting us know everything that's going on. To the City Council, you guys are fantastic. Thank you again for your service. I know what it is to serve. I know the sacrifices you make. And so I want to thank you for taking time out of your personal schedules to be here tonight. To my staff, so to be very, very blunt, they were both being kind. My district director, Jesse Purdon, he's the water guy in the office. And so coming out of the business world, the number one thing I look at when I hire people or bring people to work in any endeavor I'm doing is I try to fill the gaps where I know I'm not strong. And so Jesse's knowledge of water quality in Southwest Florida has been instrumental to the office. He's the one that is often reminding the DC office of some of the critical aspects of what we're doing in DC. And so Jesse, I'm always thankful for everything you do for our office. And I just want to make sure everybody here in this room understands Jesse's contributions, not just being district director, but specifically towards water quality. We have our senior district office manager. She's here, Mercedes. Mercedes has been with me for a long time, way before politics we've known each other. So Mercedes, it's great seeing you. Madeline Dawson's up from the DC office. She's my assistant comms director. We have the rest of the staff. I'm not gonna go through it all. Love y'all, great seeing y'all over there. But we're gonna try to get to it. Last but not least, I wanna thank you all for being here. You don't have to do this. You don't have to come to these type of meetings, but I really appreciate it when you do. The one thing that I always wanted to commit once we went into office was to be in as many communities in the district as possible and take an opportunity to hear from you about the things that you're concerned about, whether it's local, whether it's statewide, whether it's national, or whatever the case might be. So with that, that's the opening statement. Let's get to the questions. You don't have one, I'm just gonna pick somebody. I do that to him all the time, guys. I do it to him all the time.
All right. From, it looks like Mr. Stallings in Sanibel. What is the number one existential threat to our republic?
So, 2 minutes, huh? So I was actually earlier today. Thank you, by the way. I was actually in Broward County and Palm Beach County earlier today. I was speaking with college students, and when I speak with college students, the number one thing I always start with is the republic. You see, we have many disagreements in our politics. We're going to continue to have many disagreements in our politics. Anybody that has family knows you have disagreements amongst family. So if you're going to have disagreements amongst family, you're definitely going to have them amongst your government and amongst our politics overall. The issue is not disagreement. Our society, our country, what has made it the greatest experiment in the history of the world is that we have found a way to have disagreements but still forge together as one America. That's what's made us distinct. If you are a Game of Thrones person, like I'm binge watching Game of Thrones right now. It's my get-up, okay? I gotta have something. So I'm watching the Game of Thrones, and my wife is watching The Crown on Netflix, and we were actually talking about monolithic sovereign governments, about what it really meant to live under the sovereignty of the crown, where the crown would decide at any given day, this is what I want to do, and this is where we're going, and everybody else just had to eat it. So I would say the number one thing that concerns me about the Republic today is that we are losing an appreciation for the disagreement, and in some respects, the dysfunction of the Republic. It's supposed to be hard to pass laws. We're not always going to get along, and that's okay too. But there has to be an appreciation for the differences. There has to be an appreciation for the disagreements, as long as we're still moving together as one America. More specifically, in Congress, my concern is that Congress is highly dysfunctional. The process is not designed to be collaborative. We go into committee hearings, and there's literally 4 members in the room. Some members are on Zoom. Members we don't even ask questions of a bill being presented to us. We go into these 5-minute round-robin speechifying debates, which really aren't debates. There's not an opportunity under Speaker Pelosi to actually amend legislation for it to go to the floor. How is the people's body supposed to actually operate in a constitutional republic if the members who were duly elected, Republican or Democrat, that part doesn't matter, who were duly elected don't even have the ability to actually do their jobs as elected representatives? The last thing that concerns me about the Republic right now is the tribalism in our politics, which I believe is 100% being pushed, well, not 100%, mostly being pushed by social media and big media. You see, the social media companies were originally designed to be platforms for people to share their thoughts, their ideas, their pictures of what I ate for dinner, I'm going to brush my teeth. Y'all remember those posts from 10 years ago? I'm going to brushing my teeth now, like stuff like that. I'm at the beach, it's Mother's Day, we're all taking our pictures. That's what it was supposed to be. What it has become under the guise that the social media companies are doing are these algorithms that push people down the rabbit hole they're already going. They show you what you want to see, and they make billions of dollars off it in the process. My attitude with the social media companies is that if you want to push people down the rabbit hole, hey, that's business, that's fine. But then you can't censor people on the other side of the situation. You can't have it both ways. You have to decide what you want to be. If you want to be a censorship platform, be one. If you want to give people the opportunity to share their ideas freely, then do that. But you can't do both. And what we've seen in social media, and it's crystal clear now, that if you are somebody who subscribes to progressivism, you will only see more progressivism basically in the posts in your feed. If you're somebody who subscribes to conservatism, you will basically only see conservatism in your feeds. What the Republic requires is a robust debate on all the issues and all the ideas and all the policies. It has to be messy. It's important to be messy. Because it is through debate, it is through actual disagreements, it's through conversation that we forge a more perfect union. It cannot be forged by one group or one party or one company deciding what's real or not, what's fake and what's true. We have to have a robust disagreement in our politics. It's healthy to have one. Because I don't know about you, but the last thing I want is a monolithic thought process governing the United States of America. That's to the detriment of everyone. I'm warmed up.
Ready to go. All right, let's go. Question number 2. This is a 2-part question from, I believe, Peg Burney is the name, Peg Burney. How much can a state do to protect its borders when the federal government refuses to act? Second question. How much is the government spending on NGOs to transport, house, etc., those who come here illegally?
So let me take the second question first, and I'm going to come back to state sovereignty with respect to immigration. With respect to NGOs, we're not sure how much the NGOs are spending to transport people through the United States. That's one of the lines of questioning we've actually asked the administration for. The administration has refused to answer that question. We've asked the administration a lot of questions about immigration writ large. The administration does not respond to congressional requests. Well, I don't want to speak for the members of the majority party. I know that in the minority party, they're not responding to our requests associated with the cost of immigration, and specifically moving people through the United States the last 14, 15 months. what is the role of states? I know Governor DeSantis signed a law basically that, or put in the budget that they will bus people out of the state to DC. I know Governor Abbott did a similar thing from border communities in Texas, sending them directly to DC saying you deal with it. Or I think Governor DeSantis sent it to Delaware. The reality is, the problem we have at the southern border is one specific thing. The Biden administration's view of asylum is the most radical view of asylum ever in American history. The southern border is an illegal entry point into the United States. It is not a legal point of entry. If somebody wants to claim asylum, they should do it in their home country at the United States Embassy, or if their country doesn't have one, at the next closest country to theirs. What is happening with immigration is, I'm going to use China as an example. If you are immigrating into the United States illegally from China, you basically pay roughly $10,000 to $15,000 to the coyotes, aka the drug cartels. You hop on a plane from somewhere in China to Mexico. Mexico has a tourist visa agreement with China. So Mexico, when you get there, they give you a tourist visa. From Mexico, you fly somewhere in Mexico, you fly from there, whether it's Tijuana or Mexicali, or I forget one of the other cities south of El Paso. That might be Mexicali. Forgive me on Mexican geography. But to one of the border cities in Mexico. You either fly there or you take the route that the cartel has you take to cross the southern border. When you come onto the southern border, and I know this because I was just there last week, when you come onto the southern border, they are ditching the Mexican identification Mexico gave them to come into Mexico. They're throwing it on the ground, crossing the border, walking up to a border agent and claiming asylum. Because there's no documentation on their person, for us to say that Mexico gave them legal authority to be in their country, we are not sending them back to Mexico. We are then doing an asylum vetting on the southern border. We're processing people, giving them a court date, and releasing them into the United States. That is the process that's happening on the southern border. I'm not being hyperbolic, I'm not being political, I'm explaining what's happening. So if you go back to the issue we have with immigration, it is because the Biden administration has the most liberal interpretation of asylum we've ever had, number one. Number two, they are allowing asylum to be processed indiscriminately on the southern border. That makes no sense. Because what the drug cartels are doing, they know what the laws and the implementation is here as well. So they're saying, oh yeah, okay, cool. We'll move 100 or 200 people across the border illegally. When the border agent, I was in Yuma section last week, when the border agent is occupied with 100 people, and I saw them standing right there on the side of the road with the border agent, when they're occupied with this border agent, the cartel then moves drug traffickers with fentanyl, heroin, cocaine across the southern border. You want to know why we have a fentanyl crisis in the United States? It's because the southern border is wide open. The drug cartels know this. The Biden administration knows this. Neither one is apt to change anything right now. It is a sad state of affairs. What can states do? There was a Supreme Court decision back in 2014 dealing with Arizona's law that would check for immigration status if you engage law enforcement. The Supreme Court at that time gave the President of the United States plenary power with respect to immigration. So unfortunately, most of the governmental apparatus, whether it's the federal government or state government, has their hands tied because it's all been placed into the hands of the president. And depending on the whims of the president determines how immigration is enforced. State lawmakers are very limited in what they can do. I'm quite sure some of this is going to end up in court, and we'll see what the Supreme Court decides then. But if you were going to ask me what our real problem is that the president has completely abused the asylum process. Asylum was never supposed to be this. There was never any contemplation by any Congress at any point in American history that would have allowed for this asylum process to be used the way it is being used. So, the state's hands are tied. They're trying to do everything they can to protect their citizens, as they should. There's some questions about an Article 4 case being moved, because there's a question in Article 4 of the Constitution, the federal government actually has a responsibility to defend the sovereignty of states. And if states are feeling their sovereignty is being challenged and the federal government's not doing anything to protect it, there's potentially an Article 4 lawsuit associated with that. But it's really tough right now. been to the border 3 times in a year. Our border agents are tired. Their morale is incredibly low. The suicide rate of our border agents are up. It's a very bad situation. And the last thing I will say, what the administration refuses to answer is what about the young girls who are being sold into sex slavery by the cartels? What about the young girls who are being raped south of the border? What about the young girls whose parents are either putting them on birth control or giving them Plan B because they know they're going to be raped in this journey? Nobody talks about any of that. And the administration needs to answer for all of that, in my view.
Thank you. We have quite a few border questions.
I'm gonna go faster.
Yeah, okay.
I'm gonna go faster.
And so I'm sorry, I was trying to siphon through. Some of these are hard to read. All right, so I apologize if this is a repeat. From Margaret King.
Yes.
After your last visit to the border, please address what you saw, what you think can be done. If we take the House and Senate, what the Border Patrol thinks about the situation. FYI, very happy to have voted for you. So I don't know if you just want to elaborate on what you just said. Seems like you may have answered a lot.
So let me talk specifically to what can be done in the next Congress. I think I addressed most of it in my previous answer. In Congress, my view is that we're going to there's going to have to be a serious debate if we're going to have a stalemate with the president about immigration enforcement. What the Biden administration is doing right now, and I was with border agents, like I said a week ago, the Biden administration is sending more people down to the border to process asylum. So all they want to do is speed up the processing. They don't want to secure the border. If you talk to the border agents that are not, they do their job and they're not in charge, and you talk to them like off to the side, they are very explicit about how dumb that is. What they're saying is that if you process faster, but don't secure, you're just inviting more people. Simple stuff, makes sense, right? But in Congress, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to tie the administration down by the budget, because that's Congress's power and Congress's authority. We need to put forward, whether it's a budget or a continuing resolution, the one thing that we have to make sure, if Republicans take back Congress, which I think is what's going to happen, is that without a doubt, we must hold the administration to account through the budget. And we must make sure that when we authorize money to be spent by Homeland Security, it can only be used for actually securing the southern border, not for processing more claims, not for making it faster. If you do that, it then forces the hand of President Biden to veto a continuing resolution and shut down the government, or decide he's actually going to enforce the law, which is the desire of most Americans today.
All right. So also a border question, but a 3-part question. I'll just go to the third, which is from Terry Cork. What are the Republicans ready to move forward on after the elections? Very worried about the fentanyl coming across the border from Mexico and China.
Will we say that last part again? Are you very concerned about fentanyl
Very
coming?
concerned about the fentanyl coming across the border.
Okay. With respect to fentanyl, I'm very concerned as well. When I talk with young people now, what I tell them is, listen, you should not be doing drugs. We understand that young people are doing drugs. We understand adults do drugs. I try to tell them implicitly, I've had this conversation with my sons. It only takes a missed dosage of fentanyl to kill you. And the missed dosage of fentanyl is infinitesimal. It's incredibly small to kill you. We're not talking about you took a hot dose of heroin, or we're not talking about this stuff. You cannot see it with your eyes. You cannot measure it in a needle. You cannot decide how much you're going to put in the pipe. You don't know what's in these pills, because the fentanyl pills that are coming across now are being packed and baked in Mexico and coming across. And that's not Bristol Myers Squibb, folks. It's not Merck doing this stuff. They have done missed dosages, and that is what's killing Americans every single day. We had a hearing on some of the issues associated with the fentanyl crisis, and there was a father sitting in front of us, and he said the kids who are dying from fentanyl are not your druggy kids, not the kids who do a lot of drugs. It's the kid who basically has got life kind of figured out and is working hard and is at a party and just decided, I'll do this one time, but I'm not really into drugs, and they're dying because they were in a social environment and decided to try it, and they're dying. It's a terrible thing that's hitting all communities across the United States. What was the first part of that question?
It was related to, oh my gosh, yeah, it was related to the border.
What are the Republicans ready to move forward on after the elections?
So this is one where we are actually having serious discussions internally, not just on immigration, but on a lot of issues. We're going to be putting out essentially our commitment to America about what Republicans are going to do in the majority. We're having heavy deliberations amongst the members about what are we going to stand for, what are we going to fight for, what are we going to tell people we're going to do. It'll be released in pretty short order, actually, probably another month or two. Now, on immigration, there's almost unilateral support amongst all Republicans elected in Congress, and we have to be very firm along the lines that I talked about with respect to immigration.
All right, off the subject, from Marissa Mayach, Joan Hathaway's daughter, says that. If Governor DeSantis considered running for president and we lost him, would you consider running for governor?
I wonder where you got that question from. First of all, I will say this. You know, I just got here. I want to be straightforward with y'all. I am your 5th congressman in a decade. That's kind of a problem. We need somebody who's going to stick around for a little bit and get this thing worked out. I will also I'm telling you right now, I'm not a congressional lifer. So I'm like 10 years max and I'm gone. I'm not a congressional lifer, I'm just being honest with you. That's my feelings about the place. I think that members should go serve and go home. If the opportunity was afforded, my attitude is, if you're going higher, okay, see where this thing goes. If not, go home. If it happens and it comes to fruition, I'll probably come back to you and ask you for support.
Ed would like to know, piggybacking on that, what is your position on term limits?
Actually, my position is pretty strong. I think one of the issues we have in Congress is there have been too many members that have been there for far too long. The argument that if you have term limits, you empower the staff and you empower the lobbyists, in my view, is ridiculous. Guess what, folks? The staff is empowered now. And look, I'm a member of Congress. Let me give you a pinch of my day. I hit the Capitol around 8 o'clock. I'm in meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. I do a couple press hits. I'm in some committees. Committee's actually the place I get away from my staff. It's beautiful. Because I can be in the committee room and they can't bother me. Right? I'm kidding. But I'm in committees nonstop. Then I leave committees. I go off campus. I have other meetings. Then I go out. I have a dinner, maybe 2, maybe a couple receptions. By the time I get to my bed, it's probably 10 o'clock, 10:30, 11 o'clock. Rinse and repeat every single day. I have roughly 13 staff members in my office. I need every one of them, not to mention committee staff, not to mention staff for the federal bureaucracy, not to mention staff for the executive branch. If you don't think the staff is empowered now, you don't know Congress. And I pride myself on being a pretty engaged member of Congress. So I think with respect to term limits, you have to have them. Second point, there's term limits in the Florida legislature, 8 years in the House, 8 years in the Senate. If there weren't term limits in Florida's legislature, I would have never had an opportunity to be in Florida's legislature. My opinion. If I wasn't in Florida's legislature, I wouldn't be your congressman now. My opinion. I think you need a fresh injection of thought and ideas and passion and blood in the process. My third issue with term limits, or the lack thereof. Congress doesn't have any deadlines. First of all, when you're under term limits, you know, I got 8 years. I got to figure this thing out and figure it out fast and get about the business of what people sent me here to do, what my passion projects are, and if I want to go higher, I better make a good case for myself, so I got to do something now. In Congress, there's no pressure to do anything except pass the debt ceiling and keep the government spending going. That is it. So if you don't have term limits, there's no pressure for members to actually be about the people's business whether it's immigration, the financial world, monetary policy, fiscal policy, our budgets, etc. There is no urgency. Defense, VA, all of it. There's no urgency in Congress. We need urgency in Congress if the people's business is going to be done. Now, there are term limit proposals for 8 years in the House, 12 years in the Senate. There's 12 years in the House, 12 years in the Senate. 12 and 12 sounds good. Sounds pretty good. 2 terms as a U.S. Senator, 6 terms as a House member. You gotta have a situation where the members will realize it's in their best interest to vote for this thing. Now, I'm for it. I'm thinking, cut us down, give us our time period, get us in, get us out.
How do you do that?
You have a lot, well, I don't want to spoil it because we got a lot of cameras in the room, but I got some ideas. What I will add to that part is, I know 2 guys. They might be the next president of the United States tomorrow. I'm gonna have that conversation privately with them.
From John Scandler, I apologize. Ignoring political factors, what are the top 3 issues that need attention and can be achieved?
The first is entitlements. Social Security and Medicare. Listen, I'm not going to poll, but something tells me that there's several people in the room who are on both of those programs. Trying to give me a Marco Rubio deal here. I kid with Marco about the water thing all the time. We have to address the programs. They go insolvent in 5 to 7 years. Here's the truth about what's going to happen. If the programs go insolvent, under law, there are automatic benefit cuts in Social Security and Medicare. Automatic. Roughly 20 to 25%. Done. That's the law today. In Congress, we have 5 budget rules. We waive them all the time. Which means if you have budget rules that you waive, you have no rules. Here's what my opinion of what will happen if Medicare when Medicare goes insolvent, not if, when. There will be a bill that will come from the Speaker's office, and it will be to waive the rules on the budget cuts, on the automatic benefit cuts associated with Medicare. When you do that, Congress will say, oh, well, that wasn't so bad. We'll just deficit spend the programs. Our debt is 30 trillion, folks. The United States, in my view, could probably handle 65.5 trillion in debt. I don't want to test that number, but I think we probably legitimately can handle it. How fast do you think we're going to get to 65 trillion if Social Security and Medicare go insolvent? That thing's going to be a rocket ship unlike anything we've ever seen. It will hamper us on the world stage from our military preparedness. It will hamper us here at home with respect to other programs that people have become expectant and reliant on, because all that's got to get cut to pay Social Security and Medicare. That's the number one issue facing us all that nobody will ever talk about. And look, I get it, it's the third rail of politics, but guess what? This is the truth. We got to fix it. We have the solutions. We can do it. The politics is what gets in the way. 100%. That's 1. 2 is immigration. We've already talked about that. We got to clean up the border system. Do we have a need for people coming into the United States to work? Yes. Do we want to be a society where you have walls with doors like President Reagan said? Yes. Do we want to be a society where nobody can come in? No. But you got to have rules. There has to be a process. You know what I mean? I was telling some people one day, I said, look, our immigration problem is like you have a house and the roof is leaking. Your roof is leaking and you know, as a husband, your wife comes in and says, honey, we need more water. And what you do is you just bring in more buckets to collect it. You don't fix the roof and fix your plumbing so you have water come in orderly. You just let it leak through the roof. That's what we're doing with respect to immigration in the United States. We're just letting people leak through the roof, as opposed to fixing the problem and having an orderly process for immigration going forward in the United States. That's what we should do. Ooh, those are 2. Number 3, term limits. Okay, what we got?
Okay. Greg would like to know, what is being done to stop the skyrocketing home insurance rates? He saw a 20% increase this year.
So, yeah, thank you for that question. This is a really big one. So 2 things. Not a deflection, fact. Insurance rates are something that's governed at the state level. When I was in the state legislature, I chaired insurance and banking. We actually looked at home insurance issues before. One of the things that I was concerned about when I was chair of the subcommittee was the potential for rising home insurance rates in the future. Unfortunately, that has become a reality since I've left the legislature. I've talked to a couple of my colleagues, Senator Pasadomo, who's going to be the next Senate President in the state legislature, and Representative Bob Rommel. He was my roommate in Tallahassee, still represents out of Naples. They are going to be working on that. I believe there's legislation to deal with it right now in a special session, which was just convened today. And they're going to be trying to figure out a way to get this fixed. The legislature is well aware of this issue. I'm well aware of the issue. It's something that they have to work on at the state level to make sure the metrics are adjusted so property insurance rates don't continue to go through the roof like we have. The third thing, and this is the part that's a problem. Everybody loves our real estate market now, right? Because if you have your home, ooh, that net worth looking good, right? It's looking good now. With higher value rates come higher replacement rates, come higher insurance rates. So part of the reason rates are going up, in part, not in total, but in part, is that everybody's property is worth significantly more because of what I affectionately call the great COVID migration of 2021. In 2020, everybody wanted to come to Florida, and so guess what? Supply diminishes, prices increase. I wish Joe Biden would learn that lesson, so on and so forth, but I digress. When you do this, insurance rates are going to go up because the value of property has gone up as well. As somebody who worked in insurance in part of my career, when I have to insure property, I have to look at what the replacement value of property is. Because of inflation issues across the United States, the replacement value for single-family homes is up precipitously because the cost of everything is up, which raises the cost of insurance. In part, that's some of the issue we're seeing. But the legislature I know is on it, and they're doing everything they can to fix it.
Dave would like to know, how does the redistricting map changes affect our representation? Do you agree with the changes proposed?
So on this one, all I want is a fair map. I just want it to be fair. I want it to be contiguous, meaning just like communities involved in it. And as long as it's constitutional, you live and die by whatever else comes. The last map I saw from the governor's office basically leaves the congressional district here intact, like kind of how it was. I don't talk to the members about this because, quite frankly, I don't want to be engaged in it. That is their thing, not mine. But from what I understand about how redistricting works, it's really hard to redistrict Southwest Florida because we're kind of a contiguous community as is. And so it's really hard to change those lines, especially considering we've had population growth here, we know that, but most of the population growth in the state has been in the I-4 corridor, some parts of Northeast Florida, some parts here, and of course, some parts of the East Coast. So it's kind of been spread throughout the state. Most of it's actually in the I-4 corridor. I think what's probably going to end up happening is a new congressional district will end up somewhere in the I-4 corridor, and we go from there.
Jerry Ann Harden from Fort Myers is very concerned about election fraud.
Yes.
How do you feel about mail-in ballots?
So here's what I'll tell you about mail-ins. First of all, in Florida, we have the best election law in the country. I voted on election law changes 2 times when I was in the Florida legislature. I mean, we've come a long way since hanging chads, We've really figured this thing out. We were the leaders on mail-in ballots. We did it here. But the key thing about mail-in is the rules around how you get it. In Florida, the rule has always been, and this is not going to change, and I think the governor just solidified it even more, that you have to request your ballot before it gets mailed to you. Unfortunately, what happened during the 2020 elections is that you had supervisors of elections in certain counties, in certain states, that ignored election law in their states. And they used COVID as an excuse to do so. I mean, I don't know about you, but last time I checked, COVID hit the United States in March of 2020. The election wasn't until November of 2020. So don't say to me that the pandemic is the reason why. That was an excuse for rampant mail-outs of unsolicited mail ballots across the country. That is wrong. Second point on elections. If your state legislature authorizes mail-in ballots the way we do in Florida, or if they authorize it the way Oregon does, what Oregon does is just universally mailed out. I don't agree with Oregon's rules, but Oregon's legislature, under the Constitution, wrote it so that the citizens would get unsolicited mail-in ballots. If the people of Oregon do not want that, they need to change their legislature and change the law. That is the way the Constitution works. Third thing I'll say on mail ballots. If done orderly with proper rules like we have in Florida, it actually works. And it works pretty seamlessly. The issue becomes there's two issues that we have to fix. One, this is one I figured I learned. The first is you can't have unsolicited mail-outs. That's a recipe for disaster because it empowers ballot harvesting organizations to just go find where the ballots dropped and get people to fill them in and sign the ballots and send them back. That's a recipe for disaster. This is like Tammany Hall stuff, going back to New York in the 1800s. Like, this is electioneering unlike anything I've ever seen. The second thing I will tell you is that the other key thing is that what we found out is I think California allows for this. If you have a mail-in ballot that is metered by the supervisor of elections, it is not postmarked by the United States Postal Service. So if there's a date requirement for that ballot to be back at the supervisor of elections, but it's not postmarked because it was metered, how do you know it was actually sent in on time? That's the one issue I believe that we need to fix. If there's any issue that's federal associated with mail-in ballots, I think that's the one, because obviously this deals with the United States Postal Service, and that's Congress's direct purview. So actually, I filed a bill. I think it was called the Vote Act. Is what we called it. It required two things. Simple bill. It required the Secretary of State in each state to certify the amount of ballots in possession at the time the polls close of every voting district in the United States. And they had to certify that on their websites. It's simple. This is like simple inventory control, guys. The polls close. You ask your supervisors of election, Tommy Doyle here in Lee County. Tommy, how many ballots do you have in your possession? The second question is, Tommy, how many ballots have you counted? And they have to certify that to the Secretary of State 1 hour after the polls close on election day. What that does is it tells everybody, oh, Tommy's got 1 million ballots. Tommy's only counted 800. Okay, well, let's just wait for the other 200 to be counted and we're done. This is inventory. I'm a business guy, folks. Simple stuff, inventory controls. The second thing the bill does, it requires any ballot that is mailed, whether it's metered or not, must be postmarked by the United States Postal Service. So everybody knows the date it was actually released from the voter in conduit to the supervisor of elections for it to be lawfully counted. Two simple things that I would do. Kind of keeps everybody out of it, keeps the government out of it, the federal government, excuse me, and let states control their laws. But at the end of the day, you do not want the federal government changing election laws. HB 1 was a disaster, and by the way, I think it was unconstitutional. The federal government has no right under the United States Constitution to regulate elections in the several states. That is the responsibility of state legislatures. It should remain that in the republic.
A.J. Johnson says, as someone who has studied atmospheric sciences for almost 50 years, I can state with certainty man has little to no effect on the atmosphere. Biden's current administration's attack on carbon fuels will cause irreparable harm to our economy and drive already disadvantaged people deeper into poverty. If Republicans retake Congress and win, okay, excuse me.
We'll go with one.
Thank you, yeah. If Republicans retake Congress, how will they push back on these policies?
This is a great question. It goes without saying that energy is the lifeblood of every economy and every society. If you don't have cheap, affordable, and plentiful energy, you don't have an economy. It's too disjointed for your mills to run. It's too disjointed for your farms to harvest. It's too disjointed for your truckers to haul. It's too disjointed for just about everything. You can forget Bitcoin mining. You ain't got, it raises, it lowers the price, the cost of the value of Bitcoin because of all the energy it takes. Two things. One, I'm gonna put climate change on the side for a moment. Here's what I will tell you. For the argument's sake, let's say yes, the climate is rising and it's a threat to the planet. We do not have green renewable energy that has the ability to power the planet Earth. Germany is figuring that out fast. real fast. And like in real time, they're figuring this out. Even under some of the climate models that exist today that are pro-climate change models, you have to get your carbon footprint under control globally in about 25 to 30 years. The technology is not there yet for green renewable energy to even get there. You still need fossil fuels. You still need them. Now, if the energy companies want to invest in green technology, let them invest in it. That's fine. If the technology is readily available, trust me, the energy companies will sell it to you because they know you'll buy it because it'll be cheaper than oil. But what the administration is doing is they are systematically raising the cost of fossil fuels on purpose so that the only alternative is electric vehicles. I heard Pete Buttigieg on the Breakfast Club the other day, and Pete said, I'm not sure what he does, but okay. And so, Pete Buttigieg was on there, and he said, well, Americans should really go buy an electric car. And he said, what we want Congress to do is pass a $12,000 tax credit for you to buy an electric car. I'm sitting in my car, I'm listening like, man, is he crazy? So we're gonna do $12,000 tax credits for Americans to lower the cost of a car that's about $50,000 to $38,000 in an inflationary environment where people are on fixed income and people are struggling to make ends meet because everything is up, but you're gonna make them go buy an electric car? Like, where does this even make sense? So in Congress, what we gotta do, again, this is going back to the budget, a couple key things. Number one, we have to have the administration open up lease sales appropriately. Number two, this thing with the Biden administration just raised the royalty fees on new leases is insane. That will not work. Number three, and this is the hardest, the Biden administration has leases outstanding. They're not defending the permit process in court. They're not defending the permit process. So the oil companies are going to get a permit to start the drilling, and they're being sued in court, and the administration is not coming to the defense of the lease that had either they executed or has been executed by a previous administration. They're just saying, oh, you're suing? Oh, that's cool. Good luck. And they're moving on to the next thing. So we got to fix that process. It's going to be somewhat difficult in Congress. The fourth thing is we need to embrace modular nuclear reactors in the United States. For those who are unaware, a modular nuclear reactor is what we have on our nuclear subs. Our men and women who are in the Navy, who live on nuclear subs, have lived with these things literally sitting 50 feet from them. The nuclear material is 100% spent. The carbon emissions, 0. We could do it today. Congress, what we need to do is actually push forward with strong reforms to the nuclear regulatory environment so modular reactors can be utilized in American life. I was at the Port of Miami 2 months ago, and they were talking about all the things they wanted to do to electrify the ports. Sounded all good, except for the cobalt you got to get from China, which is being mined by African slave labor in the Congo. Oops, we don't want to talk about that? Okay. This is true, folks. The cobalt that is in your batteries for your electric vehicles is coming from China, and China is mining it in Africa using child slave labor to do so. That's what they're doing. So, if you want to electrify your ports, electrify the post office, which is what the Democrats want to do right now, where are you going to get the additional electricity on the grid to power all these vehicles that you want to charge? I asked one guy in the committee, I said, where are you going to get all this additional electricity? He was like, oh, well, we have a lot of new technologies that are coming online that will help us power the grid. I said, well, what's the percentage of electricity on the grid? Where does it come from? He goes, oh, well, most of it is still oil and natural gas and coal. So if you want electric cars, you're actually going to burn more fossil fuels to power the electric cars? Well, not necessarily. Oh, okay. I said, well, tell me, what's the carbon footprint for creating an electric car? Well, it saves over time. How much carbon are you burning to actually create the battery for the electric car? Well, that's stuff that we contemplate the entire life cycle. I was like, well, I thought you're trying to save the planet from carbon emissions today, but you want to build the electric car right now, but you won't realize the benefits for 25 years, but that carbon to build the electric car was already burnt now, which is not going to help us save the planet now. I love talking to them. It's great, because the logic doesn't even make sense when they have to talk their way through it. So long story short, that's what we got to do from a congressional perspective. We should embrace nuclear. We have to make the administration get serious about energy independence. We just had energy independence. It's insane to me that we gave it up for no good reason. And if we need any reason to understand why energy independence is critical, look at Germany right now.
So Mr. Slice says, U.S. tech companies doing business in China developed censorship tools and technology that allows the CCP, Chinese Communist Party, to monitor and prohibit free speech. Now these are being used, tools, thank you. Now these tools are being used on U.S. citizens. Can we pass laws that prohibit U.S. companies that violate our constitutional rights, even if it may be legal in other countries?
I think this is referring to Section 230. I think this might be a deal with this. Is this dealing with the social media companies or is it dealing with the Chinese specifically? Well, first of all, let me say this about China. If you use TikTok, and I know everybody likes it, the Chinese are spying on you. I know they say they're not.
Yeah, right.
They are. Sorry, Chairman G. You deal with that. So I think, I tell my sons, like, don't use TikTok. Just don't do it. That's number one. Number two, I think with respect to censorship in the United States, we do have a serious problem. You only have to look at the situation going on Twitter right now. Elon Musk is giving them like $7 a share as a premium. Twitter was going to get $10 billion they would never get anywhere else ever. And they're saying no. My question is, where's the fiduciary lawsuit from the shareholders? I think I gotta call my financial advisor. I used to work there, so I should call him. Like, hey, do I got Twitter in the portfolio? Because if I do, I got a cause of action.
That's right.
It is insane to me that the board of Twitter is actively blocking Elon Musk only because they want to continue to get their way. This is insanity, folks. This is not even business anymore. Because any business person worth their salt, any CEO worth their salt would have said, you're giving me a $10 billion premium? Deuces, I'm going on vacation. And that's what they would have done, and they would have taken the order from Elon, and they would have gone on about their business. This is much more than just business. This is about information control in a society, period, point blank. I don't care what anybody says, that's what I see. Especially as somebody who worked in the financial industry, if you see a deal like that come across your desk and you say no, unless Twitter is printing Bitcoin on the side, I don't see why they would say no to a deal like that. Just being honest with you. And if they're printing Bitcoin on the side, that's another issue because they're not disclosing that to their shareholders who should be able to appreciate the value that they're getting right now.
Three more questions.
Three more to go. It's like, now I just get to go do what I want.
Okay, a couple more questions and then a few statements related to water.
Sure.
All right, so Denise has a two-part question. She compromised her religious beliefs and got the COVID vaccine.
Yes.
So she didn't have to wear a mask at her new job, where she was in the military, but she suffers from anxiety attacks because of her service in the military. The deal at the bank was that they didn't require customers to wear a mask, but she was forced to wear one nonetheless, even though she had agreed to be vaccinated. She had to resign from her job and eventually lost her home, can no longer afford her nearly $2,000 a month rent. So her question is, what can be done for the people who lost their jobs because of COVID, and what about the rates for apartments?
So the rates for, I'm going to go with the apartments, I'm going to come back to COVID. The rates for apartments they're going to be higher because everything about real estate in Southwest Florida is higher. This is an economic issue that we have. It's been a bounty, and it's also a serious problem. When you have far more people move into your area than you have property available to sell, prices go up. That's just what happens. Unfortunately, that has upward pressure on rental markets, because when people sell their homes, they still got to find somewhere to live. And if you were to live in a nice house and you can afford higher rent, okay, I'll just pay the higher rent to stay in the area I like. It's a real problem for Southwest Florida. What I've talked to the county commissioners about in both Lee County and Collier County is that we have to have a serious question about densities and elevation. If you want, and as I say this, the city council down here like shudder, they're like, oh my gosh, what's he talking about? Listen, housing prices and rental prices are an economic equation. If the cost of property is X and the amount of units you can build is Y, the cost of this consumer will always be Z. So what you have to change is the amount of units available based upon the property that you have. And I actually would put the mic down. Sometimes I actually approach that person and we have a more engaging conversation. Because I understand that the responsibility I have is to represent your interests, even though on a particular issue we may not agree on that situation. But you sent me to do this job. You know what I mean? Like, you sent me. I didn't send myself. And what I find with elected officials too often is a lot of them feel like they sent themselves. And because they have honorable in front of their name, that they're now God's gift. And that's just not true at all. All the way in the back. He's got his hand up for a while. I'm going to come to him. But it's got to be short now. Wait, hold up real quick. Before we go there, we got to lay ground rules for questions. I get it. Questions sometimes can be long, but they got to be 30 seconds in length. If anybody's going to speechify, it's going to be me. We got to lay out ground rules for this stuff, y'all. Okay,
I have to say I was gratified that when you were asked what the three most important things were the greatest threats, the first thing came our ability to debate. Really, what you said that I said, the First Amendment, the right to speak freely, to free press, to worship freely, to redress grievances.
True.
And I went on January 6th to protest, as you know, the election integrity question. And someone else questioned the issue of COVID. And because I was able to research free information on the internet about COVID and Dr. Richard Bartlett's protocol, 6 months after COVID appeared, I was able to cure myself in an 84 wheelchair-bound person from COVID using Dr. Richard Bartlett's protocol, absent vaccine, and absent what the people told us we needed to do.
All right, you got to bring it up from
My question. Censorship, which speaks directly to your question of free speech, of debate, and that First Amendment. I see three manifestations, two currently in existence and one right around the corner. The one currently in existence, two, is the corporate media and big tech, which we say, oh, they're private companies, so they're allowed to restrict speech.
I get you.
They are.
Give me the question.
Google and COINTELPRO and the CIA, through its InQtel program, finance that.
What's your question, sir?
So that's one manifestation. The manifestation around the corner is central bank digital currencies. It might sound conspiratorial, but look what just happened in Canada when truckers expressed their free speech and their bank account.
All right, so here's what I'm going to do. Here's what I'm going to do. Like I said at the beginning, I'm very concerned about censorship. The country cannot survive if people do not feel they can fully express themselves going forward. The country can't survive it. We are a country based upon individual thought, individual ideas, individual liberties, pursuing your own happiness, maintaining your property, so on and so forth. That is the bedrock of the country. I know when people say maintaining property, they want to go back to the fact that slaves were a part of the American fabric at the founding of America. Well aware of all this stuff. But what we have to understand today, going forward, is if you don't have freedom to speak your mind, you don't have freedom to do anything else. With respect to digital currencies, and with Fedcoin specifically, I'm very concerned about it, although I do think a digital dollar is coming. The number one prescription myself and other members who are in the blockchain caucus have said is that if you have a digital coin with any ties to it, people will not adopt it and they will not use it because they do not trust it. The beauty of the American dollar is it has an inherent value. We can quibble about what that actually is, but there's an inherent value that we all understand. That everybody around the world has comfort in transacting with. And that you can transact without somebody peering over your shoulder to see what you are doing. If you have a digital dollar that allows for Treasury or anybody else to peer over the shoulders to see what you are doing, you do not have a transaction system that can be trusted by people. And that's something I will vehemently oppose. Good. So I just want to let you guys know that. Yes, ma'am.
That last third part of the sentence.
Oh, I gotta move on. Because I got other people.
6 words.
Yes, ma'am.
6 words in my question.
Yes.
What can we to help. That's what I said, period. And to help
Me?
help you.
So, I mean, look, elections come every 2 years. We'll see what happens in this election cycle.
On the ground.
To help me,
volunteers. What do you
man,
need?
knock doors, tell your friends, make phone calls, and get them to the polls.
Do you have a volunteer coordinator?
We are going to have one going forward, so we'll definitely have that. We'll be out in communities. I know the staff is telling me to wrap. I'm ignoring them.
Thank
Okay,
you.
what else we got? Yes, ma'am, in the back. Yes, ma'am. Yes, you. I see you.
Oh, great. It's actually a water question.
Okay.
It's a water meeting, so I'm so happy. Thank you for calling. I really appreciate your HR 7206. Okay. That's protecting communities from harmful algal blooms. However, I want to know, why don't you ask the feds for money about holding those responsible for the pollution that's causing these algal blooms? Clean up your own act.
So this is actually going to be, the reason why we're not going down that road, I'm going to tell you right now, is because once you start doing that, then you're going through the process of laying blame. And if you do that, now you open up legal causes of action. So we got to be very careful about this. There's a lot of stuff that's happened in the ecology of the lake for a long time. Things that were allowed before, whether it's back pumping, whether it's fertilizer usage, whatever the case might be, that was never contemplated at that time in law. What we cannot now say is, oh, well, because that happened before and it was never contemplated, now we're going to hold you accountable today because the law was different then. That's not an appropriate use of law or the justice system in the civil system, in my view. So I don't think we should do that. I think what we should do is repair the problems now and move forward. If you try to go back retribution is a tough word, but if you want to go back to try to find that or get additional dollars from the feds to do outside of what they should be doing now, which is funding Everglades restoration so we don't have those problems going forward, I think it distracts us from the real goal, which is fixing water long term.
How about getting them to help clean up some of what they've made? So in other words, contribute, not just have the federal governments, but also the companies that cause the problems.
Well, I would argue that the federal government and the state governments are the ones that are funding this. And the reason why I say that is that if you go back to how the Everglades was actually changed, I mean, the first person was Governor Broward back in 1900. He wanted to drain the Everglades. That's what Governor Broward wanted to do. He wanted to drain it all for farmland and for development. He was stopped from doing that. And then most of the damage to natural flow, which has created the Caloosahatchee and the St. Lucie River, was the Army Corps of Engineers. If the Army Corps didn't invest the money into the Herbert Hoover Dike and creating the Caloosahatchee as it exists and the St. Lucie as it exists, you wouldn't have the discharge problems you have now because the water system itself wouldn't allow for the water to move. So you can't just say the people who are responsible. You got to go all the way back and forth and go on that line. And that's why the responsibility falls with federal and state governments, because it was federal and state governments that created the current water infrastructure that exists. They have the responsibility to go and change that water infrastructure for the future. All right. You raised your hand just in time. I was going to break.
One more question.
One more. Because they're getting antsy. They're mad at me now.
To help with the national labor shortage.
Yes.
And which would help with prices.
Yes.
And to help with the prices at the border in general. Would you consider increasing legal immigration quotas to the United States from Central America?
The question is to deal with rising labor costs, labor shortages, and what was the third one?
And just the crisis.
And the crisis
all
of the
illegal
border.
people
Would I consider raising visas
Yeah.
for immigration, legal visas for immigration from Central America?
Yeah.
Right now, no.
Why not?
And the reason why is, this goes back to my roof analogy. If your roof is leaking, you fix your roof and then you fix your pump. You don't ignore your roof and then bring in more water from the pump. Because your problem is still your roof. You still got to deal with that. It's going to cause you more problems in the future. If we go through the process of increasing visas through the legal process, while ignoring the illegal process, you're only going to drive more illegal immigration, which is going to put more burdens on society overall. The American society overall. The other thing we have to consider is that in the great migration we had last year, roughly 2 million entrants, roughly 400,000, they call them gotaways. That's the one that they know got away. That doesn't count the ones they don't know came across. So we're somewhere between 2.5 to 2.7 million people came into the United States through means not using the visa process, okay? What about those kids who are now going to school in American public schools in various cities in the United States? Do those school districts have the budgets and have the capacity to now educate new children who showed up at their door illegally? No. What about hospitals that actually have to provide care at the emergency room because there's new people, almost 2.7 million, who are in the United States right now without health insurance, and if they get sick, they go to the emergency room? What happens to the hospital budgets in every community, including Southwest Florida? If you're going to look at immigration, we got to take a full look at it. So I agree with that, but we cannot increase visas right now when we haven't fixed one of the core issues we've had, which is the southern border. The second core issue we have. Hold on, don't stop yet. We got one more for you. Hold on now. Just wait. There's more. The other issue we have with the border, but not with the border, with immigration, is visa overstays. The number one cause of illegal immigration in the United States are visa overstays. People who were given a visa, the visa expired, they were told to return back to their native country, and they just stayed. And they're just here. If we don't fix the visa process overall with entry-exit, how can you then go and increase the amount of visas you issue? You know what I'm saying? Like, if we're gonna say we need 10,000 people a year from Guatemala, okay? And if we allowed 10,000 people to come in last year, but of the 10,000 that came in last year, 2,000 of the visas expired. But we give Guatemala another 10,000. What interest of it is Guatemala to make sure the 2,000 who expired actually returned home or went through the legal process to get their visa renewed? This is what needs to happen in immigration. I get everybody wants to come to the United States. Listen, as a black kid born in Brooklyn, New York, who was poor, I hit the lottery being born in the United States. I hit the lottery being born in the United States. I know this. But if people are going to come in, it has to be through an orderly legal process. The way we administer immigration is haphazard. It is not orderly. Some of it is not legal in my view. We got to fix all of that before we go back to increasing visas. First of all, I want to tell you guys, it's great to be here.
I kind of live a life of recluse, and you brought me out, and the State of the Nation brought me out. I think you're a good man. I think you're a humble man. I think you can take us in the right direction, and you are, and I so appreciate that. And I just wanted to, I'm a constitutionalist. I believe it is a supreme document contrived of divine wisdom and inconceivable foresight. I think it's a type of wisdom and foresight that eludes modern day man, and it's not bestowed upon the ordinary. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
With that said, and knowing that the exceptionalism of our great country rests in that the power lies with the people, will you promise us to work to reestablish the integrity of our elections, and that you understand the danger in false propaganda like it got to back in Germany in the 30s and 40s, like Russia now? I am 100% free speech, and you have no idea how hard it is for me to speak in public like this, but I am all about free speech. But where are the Walter Cronkites? Where are the individuals? The power only works with the people if the people are well-informed and unbiasedly informed. They need the real story, whether it be energy, whether...
So here's what I get where you're going. By the way, first of all, to speak up like this, I know your story. You were me, well, not me, but I did that.
I was a black man. That's how I identify. That's how I identify.
You don't get in trouble now. The point I'm making is that, my close friends, they know, man. 15 years ago, I would not be doing this here. 15 years ago,
we are so glad you are. We are so glad you are.
I do want to commend you for coming out and speaking your mind. Like I said at the beginning, the Republic requires that we all speak our mind, and it's unfettered. and you have an ability to speak that. Now, we all understand you can't scream fire in a crowded theater. We understand that. But people should be free to express their opinions, regardless of their opinions, and they shouldn't be shouted down. They shouldn't be demeaned. They shouldn't be discouraged from doing so. Specifically to the wisdom that the framers had and the forethought that they had. The framers of the Constitution understood one very important thing. They understood that if you were going to have a society that would allow their progeny to grow and be free and to continue to be free and to do more than they could ever possibly imagine, you had to have a government based upon separation of powers and limited government. Right. They understood this so well because if you examine the vast majority of governments throughout human history, the vast majority of them have been based upon dictatorial, monolithic, sovereignty-style governments, where the sovereign was blessed by God and everybody else had no thought in their brain and no opinion worth shouting. If you're going to have a society where a black kid from New York can become a congressman, or an immigrant child can become a medical doctor, or a kid who grew up on the wrong side of the tracks in a trailer park ends up playing defensive tackle, for one of the great teams in pro football, or whatever the success story is, we can't even fathom it. Or develop a country like Amazon, or develop Twitter, or Netflix, or start Bitcoin mining operations, come up with the next innovation you can't even see. If you're gonna have a country like that, the only ability for a country like that to be created is one of economic liberty, one of religious liberty, and one of political liberty. You have to have all three. The framers understood that because they lived under the tyranny of the British kings. And they saw the tyranny of the sovereign governments all through Europe. And they decided they wanted different. George Washington could have made himself a king. He could have. But he understood that would have been cool for him. And it probably been cool for his kids. But it would have been destructive of the great experiment they created here that they fled Europe to find. As a guy who I'm without question comes from a lineage of slavery, if it wasn't for a country constructed that believed in the liberty of economics and of politics and of religion, slavery would have lasted far longer in the United States than it did. So we all bear a responsibility for keeping this thing going. I think the last comment I will make on that, my concern about modern wisdom is that America today, we are the progeny of American exceptionalism. And I think that we have some Americans who have forgotten or do not understand or do not appreciate or have not fully contemplated how special, how intricate, and how delicate American liberty truly is. I just hope we got enough people who figure it out and we move the country forward in a more prosperous way. Thank you so much.